In the last video we looked at how quantum processes and holons describe the nature of cosmic consciousness and absolute sentient power, and how, in line with the panpsychic view of the universe, the human mind can be viewed as a tiny subset of the universal cosmic mind. So in quantum process and holon terms, is there any room for God? I'm sure everyone is aware that being all-knowing, all-powerful, and being present everywhere are properties attributed to God. In the last video, we showed that absolute sentient power has these properties. So are the terms absolute sentient power and God the same? To try and answer this question, and to delve into the difference in nature between spirituality and religion, discover the limits of scientific investigation, and find out where science ends and faith in God begins, we are going to look at some more HOLON diagrams. For now, we are going to stay with the idea of absolute sentient power, a term borrowed from Eugene Halliday's work, where he also sets out reflexive thinking, a way of thinking that enables a person to center themselves upon themselves and not fall into identification with conceptual forms and ideas. On the left, figure 1, the blue disk represents the holon, that is the infinite universal sentient field, and the red dot represents the center of consciousness of the universal field, cosmic consciousness. In figure 2, we've added a purple dot to represent the infinite universal reflexive self, the decision center of cosmic consciousness. In figure 3, the white dot represents the combination of the universal center of consciousness and the universal reflexive self. This dot represents a local view of absolute sentient power. This has the property of being all-knowing and all-powerful. Now, in a previous video, the important observation that we made was that in a truly infinite universe, everywhere is at the center of the universe. And this means that absolute sentient power is present everywhere. This is illustrated in figure 4 by the full white circle. So there are two ways of illustrating absolute sentient power. On the left we have a local view, and on the right a universal view. So how does a human mind fit in with absolute sentient power? In the center, the human mind is illustrated in the same way as in previous videos. The outer circle represents the boundary of the subconscious mind, and the ovals with their little red centers of consciousness represent the specific idea holons that somebody may be thinking about, that person's conscious mind. The small purple circle in the center of the outer circle represents that person's center of consciousness. The arrows show this human mind as a tiny subset of the absolute sentient power in both its local and universal view. So what do these diagrams tell us about what's going on when someone starts thinking about absolute sentient power? Let's first have a look at the local situation. The red double-headed arrow represents a thinking path from the person holon to the absolute sentient power. The double-headed arrow indicates that this thinking path represents a relationship between the two. Now, there is a big difference between thinking about absolute sentient power and thinking about any other holon in existence. The absolute sentient power holon is the only holon that encompasses all the others, the only one that is infinite in extent and has no boundaries. All the other holons have boundaries and are finite. Previously, when we have investigated decision-making, we recognize that holons have a need to grow, or at least maintain the extent of their boundaries. They do so from a fear that they may shrink out of existence. We have recognized that this fear means that in order to survive and grow, idea holons lobby our decision-making centers for support. The absolute sentient power holon, however, because it is infinitely large, is confident in its existence. It has no need of an agenda to grow. After all, the absolute sentient power holon contains every other possible idea holon in the universe. The absolute sentient power holon is indeed unique. So when people think about it, they escape the constant demand for attention from all the myriad of finite holons that make up our conscious dynamic universe. Meditating, thinking about absolute sentient power, gives people peace, relief from the constant demands of competing earthly holons. Now, if we look at the universal view on the right-hand side of the diagram, we see something else that is very interesting. The human mind holon is an integral part of absolute sentient power. Everything that makes us an individual human is an incredibly tiny, indivisible part of absolute sentient power. It is not unreasonable, then, to suggest that when meditating upon absolute sentient power, people experience this indivisibility with the Absolute. These experiences are incredibly intimate, special, and unique for every individual person. Such experiences can be termed spiritual experiences. In the quantum process and holon view of reality, a person's spirituality is recognizing and experiencing that you are an indivisible part of absolute sentient power. So what about religions? In this diagram, the light blue circle is an example of a religion group holon. It consists of 11 people. The center of consciousness of the religion group holon is represented by the red circle, and the red double-headed arrow represents thinking pathways. The dashed red double-headed arrow represents a person's reflexive thinking pathway that we used in the last slide to illustrate the idea of spirituality. We are now going to look at the thinking pathway of someone who is a member of, a subscriber to, a religion group holon. The solid double-headed arrow indicates that the religion holon has its own relationship, its own reflexive thinking path to absolute sentient power. It also has a thinking path relationship with all the individuals who subscribe to the religion. The lower red double-headed arrow shows this for just one person. When this individual thinks about absolute sentient power, they are influenced by their religion holon. They think deflexively. They first think about the religion holon and take into account its requirements, before connecting with the absolute sentient power. The religion holon effectively regulates the relationship between the individual and the absolute sentient power. This means that religions have great influence over people's relationship with absolute sentient power. Earlier in the series, we recognized that people subscribe to group holons because they are an aid to their survival. And there are indeed many advantages to subscribing to a religion group holon. First, they offer a common way of relating to absolute sentient power. This binds people together in a fundamental way. Different religion group holons will have their own customs and history. They will have grown out of a set of tenets that members of the religion subscribe to. In an ideal religion, these tenets set out social norms and rules by which people can live comfortably together. And as we have seen earlier, a person has a far greater chance of surviving in a society than as an individual. Most religions include some form of ritual worship that gives people a common, beautiful and uplifting way of experiencing absolute sentient power. Such experiences are religious experiences. We can see how these can be very uplifting in the same way as a spiritual experience. They are both a connection to absolute infinite sentient power, and both give individuals a time of peace. Unfortunately, we do not live in a utopia, and history is littered with examples of when religion holons have not served humanity's better interests. We have previously looked at how holons can become controlling and even psychopathic. And when we look at the excesses of the Inquisition and fundamental extremism in all religions, we see that we need on a continuous basis to be very careful to maximize the positive aspects of our religions and minimize their downsides. Certainly, it is easy for religious leaders to become misguided. We should also be aware that narcissistic and psychopathic individuals will see religion holons as a means of controlling others. Here we return to the dangers of groupthink that we covered earlier. In practice, many people think both reflexively and deflexively about absolute sentient power. People who describe themselves as spiritual but not religious think only reflexively, and people who describe themselves as only religious think deflexively. Many people, of course, use both reflexive and deflexive thinking and describe themselves as both spiritual and religious to differing degrees. In the quantum process and holon paradigm, religions are powerful group idea holons. But we still haven't addressed the question of whether the terms absolute sentient power and God are synonymous. We need to go back to slide 3. This diagram shows the local and universal view of absolute sentient power. And in the last video we reasoned that if the physical universe has the properties of absolute sentient power, that is, being all-knowing, omnipresent and all-powerful, then it is reasonable to suggest that we live in a panpsychic universe, where, in spite of the universe having godlike properties, human experience can be explained in terms of consciousness, with no need for a reference to God. This is essentially an atheistic viewpoint. However, one can also take a pantheist view, that as the universe and God have inseparable properties, then the universe and God are the same. This is in keeping with the deist view, that reason and observation of the natural world are sufficient to establish the existence of a supreme being or creator of the universe, and that this supreme being does not intervene in the universe. Now at this point in our deliberations, we have come to the limit of what scientific logic can tell us about the universe and absolute sentient power. However, this is not the end of the story. Let's have a look at this same diagram, but label it differently. Here we've replaced the heading Absolute Sentient Power with the word God. This diagram takes a straightforward view that an entity that is all-knowing, all-powerful and omnipresent should simply be called God. So how, apart from the labels, is this slide any different to the previous one? Unsurprisingly, it depends on how you look at it. In this case, we can think of the small white circle in the local view as being a hole going through the screen. Similarly, we can think of the full white circle of the universal view also going through the screen. This is equivalent to envisaging God, previously absolute sentient power, as existing outside of our three-dimensional universe, in some other dimension. Interpreting the slide this way, we have a dimension in which God can exist that gives God the room to create the three-dimensional universe in which we live. God transcends the three dimensions and time of our universe. This allows for our knowledge of God to come from revelations from a God or gods who are partly or wholly outside of our universe. This viewpoint is consistent with the panentheistic view that God is greater than the universe and includes and interpenetrates it. It is also consistent with the theist view that God is the creator of the universe and does intervene in it. The interpretation of this diagram, based on the depiction of absolute sentient power, God, being a part of the screen, sets the limits to the quantum process and HOLON scientific investigation of reality and consciousness. It illustrates the limits to scientific endeavour. The interpretation of this diagram, based on the depiction of God, absolute sentient power, existing beyond the screen, illustrates where science ends and faith in God begins. We have now accounted for all the phenomena that we put on a wish list for an explanation at the beginning of this series. We have found, using universal quantum processes and HOLONs, a consistent way of explaining space, structure and form, materials, solids, liquids and gases, life and consciousness, why we make tools, cyborgs, how we think, what our minds are and how we make up our mind, why we have families, societies, corporations and countries, where our emotions come from, how we can be a balanced or unbalanced mind, groupthink, spirits and spirit communication, cosmic consciousness, absolute sentient power, spirituality, and religion. We've demonstrated that this quantum process and HOLON scheme of thinking leads to a consistent understanding of life, consciousness, and the physical universe, effectively uniting the fields of ontology and epistemology. This is something that the current dominant scientific paradigm based on particles and space cannot do. However, the particle and space paradigm has proved over the centuries to be extremely useful as a basis for scientific discoveries. It has enabled mathematicians and engineers to create the amazing technological world that we have today. So we need to ask the question, can the universal quantum process and HOLONs paradigm do a better job of explaining science than the particle and space paradigm? In the final video of this series, we are going to look at how quantum processes and HOLONs provide solutions for some outstanding scientific mysteries. We will see why some subatomic particles are stable and some are not, why the universe is apparently expanding, and the nature of gravity and its relationship to electricity. We'll also see how quantum processes and HOLONs provide a consistent and straightforward explanation for the mysteries of the infamous double-slit experiments.